My great interest is how power is wielded in a way that does not show aggressiveness or domination, and yet is effective. I think about those times as Atlanta was emerging. These were critical times, and they could have gone one direction or another.
He wasn't just a smart guy, he was wise, he had wisdom.
He was a strong believer in education. He's had to do with the United Way in Atlanta at the very beginning. He was always there to help somebody.
He was involved in the Chamber of Commerce, and he was president of the Atlanta Rotary Club. He was interested in the transportation system. He got involved from a civic standpoint because of his love for the community.
His manner of leadership made it possible to bring together many disparate forces and powers. What attracted me was that what he said was said with such grace and gentility. I watched him for so long, and it wasn't a gentleness that belied strength. It was the gentleness that came from, I don't have to throw my strength around.
He was the epitome of the Southern gentleman, a last of a breed. He was loyal, trustworthy, a gentleman to the extreme. You don't find him that way today.
He made a success of the life of Georgia really astonishing. That's one of the remarkable success stories of Atlanta in terms of business acumen.
He was a very good leader. He would make known what he wanted, and he would more or less let them carry the ball and see what they did with it.
He demanded perfection of himself and of others, and so he expected it and he got it. But he did it in such a way that the people that worked for him loved him, and they respected him, and they wanted to do well. They wanted to excel.
When he would meet someone, he was careful to try to remember their name and to remember under what circumstances he met that person, so that the next time he saw him, he could say, "Hi, Bill, haven't seen you since that time at XYZ." And people liked that.
He just exuded integrity and devotion to his company, but he had that wisdom. It was more than just a smart CEO. He could see on out there.
In his larger role in the community, he was far beyond being a numbers man or management. He was, in the best sense, a kind of a diplomat for the city and a leader with a vision. And that leadership quality and those visionary qualities come very much out of a liberal arts education.
Emory was clearly on the move during his years as an Emory trustee. He listened, he distilled. Sometimes they called on him, really, to get his perspective.
He was a quiet man, chose his words very, very carefully, very serious-minded about his stewardship responsibilities. But he was always part of the thought process and the decision on any significant issue.
He was busy, but he always had time for me. And it didn't take him a long time to do business. You know, he would hear the case, he'd state his position. I found out early on, if my position ever differed from his, I'd better change mine. Once he retired from my board, he'd always attend our advisory council meetings. The retirees group that met quarterly, he always had the same chair. If he wasn't there, later years, he'd be pushed up in a wheelchair to it. But if he wasn't there, nobody sat in that place. We were hoping Mr. Dobbs was coming.
Joe DiMaggio had a consecutive game hitting streak of 56 games that everyone says will never be broken. And Howard Dobbs was a director at Atlanta Gas Light Company for over 40 years. And that tenured record will never be broken. Now, what happened during those 40 years? Incredible growth, not only at our company, but in the city of Atlanta.
I can't think of enough nice things to say about Howard Dobbs. He was one of the sweetest, kindest men I've ever known.
You're just a wonderful man to know. I was very lucky to find him as a friend.
My father died so young, he was like my father since he had no children. So he was my best man in the wedding, and he was also, you know, the person I'd go to for counsel and advice. It was the trips up to the mountains in the summer where I lived with him, and that's probably what I remember the most. I stayed up there all summer with Howard and Helen and had one assignment, which was to row the boat around the lake and help entertain the guests that they would bring up every weekend. The real impetus for that place was Helen Dobbs. She loved it up there. Aunt Helen was a spectacular lady. She was bright, she was cheerful, she was happy all the time. It just made you feel glad to be there.
Uncle Howard didn't have to talk because Aunt Helen did all the talking, because he was such a quiet, reserved person, and she was such the total opposite.
He needed a woman that would take over for him. And he would just stand there holding his glass, smiling as graciously as they come. And he didn't need to say anything. It helped him through his shyness.
When she died in a terrible car accident, that was a tragedy which affected him for the rest of his life.
After she died, I would go by to see him as often as I could. And he said to me, he said, "Sugar, I don't want you to leave your children and come over here all the time worrying about me. I will be just fine." He was such a strong man that he decided that life would have to go on. There was no doubt in my mind that anytime he made up his mind to do something, he could do it.
I knew him in his latter years, but I always felt like I got more from seeing Mr. Dobbs than he got from me. As laborious as it might have been in his last years to get around, he always came out with that walker, and we always had prayer. He always wanted me to pray for him and to pray for the country.
At 96, he was just as active mentally as he was 10 years before. The macular degeneration really took away a great part of his life. It took away particularly the yachting, which was his favorite thing.
The boat was 85 feet long with every conceivable thing you could possibly have on a boat.
The name was Howland, and that was a combination of his first name and the last part of Helen, his first wife's name. So it was the Howland. And he always had a little boat on that he called the Squealin'. The Howlin' and the Squealin'.
He loved his boats, but he also loved his captains and the people who worked for him. He made sure that once they left his employ, they were able to eat the rest of their lives. But he was one of the most charitable-minded people I've ever known.
He recognized that the wealth of the insurance company was in large measure created by the policyholders who actually purchased the insurance. And so that was a real commitment, I think, on his part, and it's one that I feel strongly that we have to honor. He was interested in health, education, the community, and my work with him got him interested in the environment.
If you give money to a public charity, many times the money is used up immediately or over a short period of time on one project or maybe just a couple of projects. The foundation, on the other hand, can be a perpetual repetition of the vision of the man who created it.
I'm one who believes in the pluralism of philanthropy, the opportunity for significant endowments to choose their own pathways, I think, is one of the great strengths of our society. So much of that kind of stewardship responsibility is the reason why Atlanta is what it is today.
I think the Dobbs Foundation will be an important asset for this community.
It will enrich lives, and it will be focused in areas that he would want it focused in.
Mr. Dobbs was part of a generation that felt a strong obligation to family, to the community.
First of all, they're committed to Atlanta, building up the institutions here, building up the good of the city. It was a generation that simply was not self-preoccupied. I mean, they enjoyed a good life. They did. Mr. Woodruff with Itchaway and all that sort of thing. Howard with his yacht. But that was not, they didn't define life in those terms. They were less concerned about being entitled and more concerned about aspiration. That's a quality that's extraordinarily rare and very powerful. And then you get it continued in their own philanthropies. Howard Dobbs' legacy now is how it's wrapped up in the genius of Atlanta. And his foundation carries that on.